What happens? When a cop thinks he is the law, and he picks the wrong person to humiliate an elderly blind woman? But he doesn't know. She's the mother of a captain who can turn the whole system upside down. A seemingly harmless cane-snapping incident in a park sparks a battle for justice. It drags an entire town into an earthquake. Officials cover up. Files vanish. The truth lies buried for a decade. But when silence is no longer an option, a son steps forward and pulls the whole machine into the light. This isn't just a case. This is a wake-up call. Some mornings don't start with an alarm clock or a glance at the world. They begin with the steady rhythm of the earth's breath and the resolve in someone's heart. In a small place called Ashton Creek, as the sun hesitates behind old pine trees, Margaret Holloway steps out of her white wooden house on the edge of the park, like she does every day. She can't see the light, but she feels it. Margaret has lived in darkness for over 30 years, ever since a car accident closed her eyes to the world forever. But instead of giving up, she chose to keep going, day by day, step by step, with the one thing she never lets go of: a dark wooden cane with an ivory handle, worn smooth by time. That cane isn't just a tool. It's a living memory of her late husband, William Holloway, a veteran who fought in Iraq and passed away from lung cancer. Before he died, he held Margaret's hand and said, "You won't walk alone. This cane is in my eyes. Walk like I'm right beside you, every step." And she has, every single day. Margaret lives alone in a small house near Everhart Gardens Park. She knows every bird song, every crack in the sidewalk, and every whiff of bread from the bakery 3 blocks away. Her mornings don't start with a phone or the news. They begin with the sacred silence of nature. She brews a pot of chamomile tea, waiting for the water to boil like a familiar heartbeat. She pours it into a small porcelain cup and sits, watching, with her heart. As the warmth spreads through her hands, she knows the world is still turning, and she's still part of it. Ashton Creek isn't a bustling town. It's as small as the palm of your hand, but holds every shade of life's emotions. Children's laughter in the afternoons, the whistle of wind through rusty iron fences. Most folks here are friendly, or at least they keep to themselves. Margaret, though blind, knows who goes to the market at what hour, who sits on the bench under the red maple, and even recognizes the squirrels that visit her window by the faint scratch of their tiny claws on weathered wood. She doesn't need sight. She has memory, hearing, and above all, a pride that doesn't waver. That morning was like any other. Margaret draped a pale grey scarf over her shoulders, buttoned her thin coat, and gently lifted her cane from the wooden rack by the door. The ivory handle slid smoothly into her hand, like a greeting from her long-gone husband. She didn't know that in just a few minutes. The entire town of Ashton Creek would witness something earth-shattering, something that starts in silence and ends with the crack of a cane breaking in the park. But for now, she walks. Each step is steady. Each tap on the ground is a quiet declaration. I don't need to see to know my worth. The air in Everhart Gardens Park still carried the scent of damp grass and faint morning mist. Margaret's cane tapped lightly on the sidewalk, each tap, tap, steady as the heartbeat of someone who's never feared the dark. She was nearing the familiar bench under the red maple, her usual resting spot, when a strange sound interrupted the quiet symphony. Heavy military boots, cold, deliberate, not the patter of children's feet or the shuffle of an old man walking his dog. These were steps with purpose, advancing like they owned the ground. "Hold up a moment, Mom." The voice cut through, clear, masculine, and sharp as steel. A man. His tone wasn't the kind that cared. It was a command dressed in politeness. Margaret stopped. She tilted her head toward the voice, her instincts whispering something was off. "Can I help you?" she asked softly, her voice calm but unyielding. The man took another step, his boots grinding the gravel with authority. "Do you walk alone a lot, at this hour?" His question sounded more like he was filling out a report than making conversation. Margaret sensed the air shift. He was standing close. There was something in his tone, a memory it stirred. Suspicion wrapped in protection, disdain masked as concern. "I walk every morning," she replied. "I've lived here 40 years. I know every branch, every pebble." He went quiet for a few seconds, as if weighing whether she was telling the truth or daring to challenge his authority. Then his tone shifted from condescending to cautionary. "You should be more careful. This isn't always a safe place, especially for people like you." "People like you, sir." Those words hit Margaret's ears like a cold needle, not because they were new, but because they were all too familiar, too raw. She didn't need it spelled out. "People like you are meant to be old, blind, black." Margaret didn't respond right away. She took a slow, deep breath, then gave a slight nod. "Thank you for the advice, but I know my way home." And she turned, walking on. Her cane tapped steadily, a silent song of defiance. She didn't want to react, to argue, or to seem weak. But inside, a wave was rising. Not fear, anger. Why, after all these years, should an old woman have to justify taking a morning walk? Behind her, he stood watching. His gaze, though she couldn't see it, cut through the air like a cold shadow trailing her every step. What Margaret didn't know was, he wasn't just patrolling by chance, and tomorrow he'd be back, not with questions, but with a real intent to humiliate, to destroy. But he didn't know. He'd just crossed the wrong woman. The next morning, the sun peeked through a thin veil of mist. The red maple in Everhart Gardens rustled softly in the breeze. Birds chirped sparingly. It seemed like the start of a peaceful day. But for Margaret Holloway, her heart hadn't cooled from the strange encounter the day before. She'd lain awake all night, not out of fear, but because she couldn't fathom why walking with her memory and her feet could make someone suspicious. Still, she chose to follow her usual routine. Nothing, not even contempt, could stop her from walking the path she saw with a clarity deeper than any eyes could offer. The grey scarf went over her shoulders. She lifted her old cane, its ivory handle yellowed with age, from the wooden rack by the door. Her hand tightened around it, a quiet vow. "Today, I walk as always." And she did, step by step, her cane tapping the damp ground. Each sound was a silent claim in a noisy world. "I'm still here. I haven't been swallowed." But this time she didn't get far. Just past the rusty iron gate into the park, a shadow stepped out from behind an old oak. "You again?" The voice rang out, brasher than yesterday, colder than the morning breeze. Margaret froze. She knew that voice instantly. Officer Craig Dalton. He approached, each heavy bootfall crushing the earth beneath him. "You're a stubborn one, aren't you? I thought I made myself clear yesterday." He squinted at her, eyeing her like a repeat offender. "I'm just taking a walk," Margaret replied, her voice calm but firm. "Alone, no guardian, no safety device? Don't you think that's dangerous? People like you shouldn't be wandering around freely." "People like you." This time, it didn't stop at words. He stepped closer, now just a few feet away. Margaret felt his breath cut through the air in front of her. She took half a step back, gripping her cane tighter, and then it happened. No warning, no chance to brace herself. "Let me show you how fragile your freedom is," Craig Dalton growled. He yanked the cane from her hand with a sharp, sudden pull. "No!" Margaret cried out. Her hands flailed, grasping at nothing, her anchor gone. In that fleeting moment, her entire world crumbled into absolute darkness. A dry crack echoed. The cane snapped. Splinters of wood scattered across the stone path. The ivory handle spun, rolling to a stop at the edge of the walkway. Her husband's cane, her symbol of freedom, her tether to memory, now broken in two, under the hands of a man cloaked in the law. Margaret sank to her knees, her trembling hands searching the gravel. No one helped, no one offered comfort, only averted glances and hurried footsteps. The morning walkers in the park, they saw them, but they didn't step in. No one dared challenge a uniformed officer, even as he trampled the dignity of a blind old woman. Next time, be smart and don't talk back, he said, his voice ice cold. Then he turned. His boots ground the gravel again. And just like that, he walked away. Margaret sat slumped on the stone path, her shaking hands clutching the broken cane to her chest. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't beg for help. She only held tight to what remained, like someone clinging to the last piece of their soul before it shattered. What she didn't know then. Over 300 miles away, a man was about to drop everything when he heard his mother's voice on the phone. Go silent for 8 seconds. Margaret had been humiliated in broad daylight, but the reckoning would come in the dark. Jabin, at a federal task force office in downtown Columbia City, amid glass walls and cold fluorescent lights, Major Daniel Holloway was in an urgent meeting. A map of domestic terrorism hotspots glowed on the screen. The officers around him had sharp, battle-hardened faces. Daniel, with his chiseled features and eyes that could pierce through any lie, was known as the counter-strike machine of the unit. But at that moment, his phone buzzed softly. A simple text from an old neighbor in Ashton Creek. Your mom's okay, but she was treated badly this morning. You should call her. Daniel excused himself from the meeting, striding quickly to a quiet balcony. His fingers dialed the familiar number. A trembling female voice answered after 3 rings. It's me, Marky. Margaret's voice came through, so soft it seemed the wind could steal it away. I'm fine. No need to worry. But Daniel knew. His mother only said, I'm fine, when things were truly wrong. He didn't press her. He didn't force her to talk. But the long pauses between her words, the faint tremble in each breath, they spoke louder than 1,000 confessions. He went silent for exactly 8 seconds. Then he turned back into the meeting room and told his commander, I'm taking 72 hours. Personal matter. 3 hours later, Daniel was gone from Columbia. His black SUV tore down the highway like a silent storm. 300 miles didn't slow him. In his mind, images of his mother flickered. Her gentle smile, her worn grey scarf, her trembling hands holding a teacup. And then that image shattered, replaced by her sitting on the ground, clutching a broken cane. No one was allowed to do that to her. No one. Daniel reached Ashton Creek as dusk fell when the streetlights flickered on for the first time that day. He didn't need to knock. The house was unlocked. Inside, the room smelled of chamomile tea and aged pine. Margaret sat in her rocking chair by the window, her hands wrapped around her grey scarf. Her clouded white eyes turned toward him, but she knew exactly where he stood. Marky, she called softly, as if she'd been waiting. Daniel stepped forward and knelt beside her. His large hand gently took hers. Tell me, who did this? He asked, his voice low, stripped of emotion. Margaret went still. She didn't answer right away. Her hand reached for the table where a cloth bundle lay. She handed it to him. When Daniel unwrapped it, the broken cane lay bare in his palm, a piece of ivory faintly etched with a W for his father's name. The splintered shaft, rough like the pane, shattered in broad daylight. It's no one's fault, Marky. Don't stir things up, she whispered, as if trying to convince herself. I'm a cop, Mom. But before that, I'm your son, Daniel said, his eyes no longer calm. And no one has the right to do this to you. Margaret rested her forehead lightly against his. They said nothing more, but the room felt heavy, charged with something brewing. Not a storm in the sky, but a reckoning born of violated honor. The next day, Daniel put on civilian clothes. No rank, no badge, no introductions. He walked alone to Everhart Gardens Park, where every pebble, every leaf still held the stain of his mother's humiliation. And he started asking. He asked the coffee vendor at the corner. He asked the old man on the park bench. He asked the young mother pushing a stroller. Just one question. Did you see anything yesterday morning? And then a 19-year-old named Jaden, the coffee vendor, nodded. I didn't just see it. I recorded it. I had a bad feeling something would happen. And I wasn't wrong. The evidence was there. The spark had caught fire. That early morning, no one in Ashton Creek knew a silent counterstrike had begun. Daniel Holloway was no longer a major in a rapid response unit. He was a son, a tidal wave beneath a calm sea, a man here to pry open the doors of silence. At dawn, Daniel was at the coffee stand on the corner where Jaden, the 19-year-old barista, parked his small mobile cart under a eucalyptus tree. Jaden was the only one who didn't look away, didn't bow his head, and didn't run when Margaret was humiliated. Jaden spotted Daniel from a distance, not with the wary glance others gave, but with the look of someone carrying a heavy secret. "You're Mrs. Holloway's son, aren't you?" Jaden spoke first, his voice soft. I saw it, and I recorded part of it." Daniel nodded slowly. He didn't need to press. Jaden was ready. He opened his phone, scrolling to a video labeled Margaret, 9 a.m. He pressed play. On the screen, Officer Craig Dalton appeared in full police uniform, striding toward Margaret. His voice rang out, cold. "You again? I thought I warned you." Margaret, with her grey scarf and cane in hand, answered in her steady, calm tone. "I have the right to walk here. This is a public park." "Right then." In a flash, Dalton yanked the cane from her hand. Margaret stumbled, thrown off balance. And then, the cane snapped. The world seemed to freeze. No clear audio was needed. The contempt and power in Dalton's eyes alone were enough to send chills down anyone's spine. Daniel said nothing, but his fists clenched, knuckles whitening. "Can you send this to me?" he asked. "Yes, I'll send it now," Jaden replied, his voice trembling. Daniel placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, gentle but firm. "You just did something most people wouldn't dare. Thank you." With the video in hand, Daniel kept moving. He went straight to the Ashton Creek Police Department, where Dalton was still working like nothing happened. At the front desk, he met Sergeant Veronica Fields, a former trainee under him from a federal training program years ago. "Veronica," he said, his voice soft but steely. "I need the patrol logs from yesterday. Craig Dalton's name. Patrol hours. Park area." Veronica hesitated, her eyes shifting from surprise to caution. "Daniel, you know this isn't simple, right? You're touching an unwritten line of defense in this job." "I don't care about any lines," he shot back. "I care about who humiliated my mother under the guise of the law." Veronica held his gaze. After a moment, without another word, she opened her computer and printed out a patrol schedule. The paper confirmed Craig Dalton was at the park during the incident. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. That afternoon, Daniel tracked down Clara Jenkins, a young mother Jaden had mentioned who often walked her child in the park. At a small house by the road, Daniel stood at the door, holding a business card. He didn't knock right away. He knew that in a small town like Ashton Creek, speaking the truth could put an entire family at risk. But when the door opened, Clara stood there, her young daughter in her arms, her eyes full of hesitation. "I know who you are and what you're trying to do," she said. "I just want the truth." "You don't have to do anything if you're not ready," Daniel said, his voice earnest. Clara was silent for a long moment. Then she set her child down in a chair. She took a breath. "I didn't see everything, but I saw him towering over her. I saw the cane break. I saw Margaret on her knees, picking up the pieces. I'll never forget that image." "Will you testify?" Daniel asked. Clara looked at her little girl, then lifted her eyes, now resolute. "If my daughter has to grow up in a place where someone like him still wears a uniform, I won't rest easy. I'll sign. One video, one patrol log. One witness is willing to step forward." Daniel now had a trifecta of evidence to ignite the storm, but he knew the door to justice didn't open with truth alone. It took persistence to push through an entrenched system. That noon, the sky over Ashton Creek hung grey, like an omen. So, not rain, but the quiet pressure before a thunderstorm. At the police station, Daniel Holloway was about to toss a spark into a pile of long damp tinder. He walked into the station with a file nearly an inch thick, containing a copy of Jaden's video evidence. The patrol report confirms Dalton's presence at the scene, a signed witness statement from Clara Jenkins, and a formal complaint signed Daniel Holloway, former Federal Task Force officer. The first to receive it was Lieutenant Harold Stone, a grizzled veteran who'd served with Daniel's father, now sitting at the duty desk like a living statue. Stone glanced at the file, his expression hardening. "Are you serious, Daniel? Accusing an active officer? In your own hometown?" "I'm not accusing. I'm exposing the truth," Daniel replied. "Do you know what you're doing?" "I know exactly. And I know I'm not the first to see Dalton cross the line. The difference is no one's had enough evidence or enough guts." That afternoon, Daniel got a call from the Internal Oversight Committee, a small county task force that handled complaints against public employees. They agreed to open a preliminary investigation, but warned him, "You need to understand, this is a conservative area. We've seen efforts like this get crushed before they start." Daniel's response was simple. "I'm not here to win fast. I'm here to make sure my mother and people like her can walk without bowing their heads." But by the next morning, the backlash began. A note was taped to his windshield. The station's internal phone system mysteriously glitched when Daniel sent a confirmation for the investigation. An old report from his Federal Task Force days was suddenly unearthed, highlighted in red, labeled "Traitor to the Team." And worse, his tires were slashed and the sides of his car were spray painted with the words, "Snitch's blood runs cold." Yeah, Snitch's blood runs cold. Daniel understood. He'd just become an outcast in the very profession he'd once served loyally. No one texted to check on him. No morning greetings at the station. Every glance thrown his way treated him like a virus in a self-protecting body. But he didn't back down. "If you hate me for defending a blind mother, go ahead and hate," he said, "because I'd hate myself more if I did nothing." That evening, he returned home, silent, but Margaret Holloway was waiting, a steaming cup of tea by the window like a quiet ritual. "My boy, they're starting to push you out, aren't they?" Daniel sat across from her. He didn't answer. He just stayed quiet. "I hear your footsteps, son. They're heavier than last night, and your hand trembles when you hold the cup." "Mom," his voice was hoarse, "I'm fine." "No, you're not fine. But you're right," she said, her words soft as a breeze but sharp as a blade. "I don't need justice just for me. I need you to stay true to yourself, even if the whole world turns its back." Daniel looked at her, his eyes stinging but holding back tears. "I don't care if they hate me, but I won't let someone like Dalton walk through this town like an untouchable god." "Then you're not alone," she replied, resting her hand on his. "Because tomorrow, more will speak out." And she was right. The next day, a third witness, someone who seemed destined to stay silent forever, stepped forward. Ashton Creek's morning felt calm, as if nothing terrible had ever happened in Everhart Gardens Park. But inside the police station, in a quiet hallway corner, that calm was beginning to crack. A young officer, Tyler Rhodes, 26, who'd moved to town less than a year ago, stood before the Internal Affairs office door. His face was pale, his hand clutching a thin file with a few handwritten, trembling lines. He hesitated for a moment, then knocked lightly 3 times. Inside, Sergeant Veronica Fields looked up, surprised. "Officer Rhodes, I need to talk, in private." An hour later, Daniel Holloway was at a small cafe holding a cold espresso when Veronica called. "Daniel, you need to come to the station now. Someone just broke the silence." When Daniel entered the interview room, his eyes met Tyler's. He'd seen Tyler before, quiet, reserved, always avoiding eye contact during night shifts. But today, Tyler looked straight at him, unflinching. "I saw it," Tyler said, his voice low but firm. "I was about 30 meters away. No one knew I was there. I was checking the park's light post camera when it happened. I saw Officer Dalton rip the cane from Mrs. Holloway's hand. I saw her fall. I wanted to step in." "But you didn't," Daniel said, not judging, just stating the truth. "I just transferred here. He was my direct supervisor. I was still on probation." Tyler lowered his head. Then he pulled a yellow sticky note from his pocket and placed it on the table. "That night, I found this in my locker. Scrawled in messy handwriting, 'You talk. You leave town with a broken leg.'" Daniel picked up the note, silent. His eyes met Tyler's, no longer the gaze of a coward, but of someone who knew that staying silent any longer would mean losing himself. "Today, I decided I'm done being afraid," Tyler said. "Because if I let this slide, tomorrow it could be my mum or someone else's." That afternoon, Daniel sent Tyler's sworn statement to the Police Conduct Review Board, along with a copy of the handwritten threat. Within 3 hours, he got a response. "We'll convene an emergency internal hearing. The initial evidence is strong enough to consider suspending Officer Dalton pending investigation." Craig Dalton was summoned. He smirked, thinking this was just a ripple. But Daniel knew, this isn't a ripple, it's a tidal wave. And this time, the water's reaching the feet of someone who thought he'd never get wet. That night, as the town slept, the late local news aired a quiet but seismic report. An officer at the Ashton Creek Police Department has been temporarily suspended following multiple allegations of violent conduct toward a citizen. The identity of a new witness remains protected. However, public opinion in the town is now sharply divided. Ashton Creek had never been a place for breaking news, but that Monday morning it split in two. One half branded Daniel Holloway a traitor to the force. The other half began to whisper, maybe that officer really did cross the line. At the station, Craig Dalton still acted unfazed, as if nothing had happened. He passed Daniel in the hallway, slapping his shoulder like a victor. "You think a few shaky signatures will bring me down?" He laughed. "I've got my people, Daniel. All you've got is your mum." Daniel didn't reply. He just looked into Dalton's eyes, a look devoid of fear or anger, carrying only one thing, the certainty that Dalton's time was running out. At that moment, Sergeant Veronica Fields rushed up, clutching a small silver USB drive. "You need to see this. Now," she said, her breath heavy. Daniel nodded, and they hurried into a conference room, shutting the door tight. The USB was plugged into a laptop. The screen flickered, then displayed, "Extracted from East Light Post Camera, Everhart Gardens Park, 08:56 a.m. It was a forgotten camera installed years ago to monitor streetlights, long overlooked. The footage came into sharp focus. Margaret Holloway walking slowly along the gravel path. Craig Dalton appeared from behind, moving fast. He didn't stop to check on her, as he'd claimed. He snatched the cane from her hand like stealing a toy from a child. She crumpled to the ground. He loomed over her and laughed. Daniel closed his eyes. The image cut through his chest like a cold blade. No more doubts, no more differing opinions. Only the truth. Undeniable. Veronica spoke softly. "This camera isn't part of the main system. It's managed by the Urban Infrastructure Department. This morning, a technician friend of mine was reviewing footage to check streetlights, and he found this." Daniel stayed silent for 10 seconds. Then he turned to Veronica. "Send that video to the Internal Oversight Committee, and I want a copy delivered to the District Prosecutor's office by this afternoon." "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm not waiting another minute. If this system has ever buried justice, I'll slam my fist on the table and make it listen." That afternoon, the full case file was submitted to the Hallstone County Discipline and Internal Review Board, Jaden's video, Tyler's testimony, Clara's statement, the patrol log, and now the park camera footage. Just 2 hours later, an emergency hearing was greenlit. Craig Dalton was immediately suspended without pay. At the same time, the local paper dropped a bombshell. Officer C. Dalton is accused of abusing authority and violent conduct toward a disabled civilian. Surveillance footage confirms the incident. Hearing scheduled this week. Outside the police station, the silence began to gather. A few who held simple signs. Justice for Margaret. No one is above the law. The cane wasn't just a cane. It was freedom. Daniel walked through the crowd, saying nothing, holding no megaphone, carrying no sign. He only nodded slightly to each person. He knew the fire of justice had been lit, not from anger, but from truth. And this time, it wouldn't be snuffed out easily. That morning, Ashton Creek felt different. The sun still rose. The birds still sang. But no one was focused on nature. All eyes turned to the county government building, where an unprecedented disciplinary hearing was about to unfold. In a grey-walled meeting room, 3 high-back chairs held the disciplinary panel, a representative from the Internal Oversight Committee, a public attorney, and, unexpectedly, Mrs. Camilla Boyd, a retired teacher representing the community. Craig Dalton sat across from them, no longer in uniform, a white dress shirt, a dark tie, his face cold, but his eyes betraying panic beneath a thin veneer of calm. His lawyer, Vincent DeMarco, a seasoned manipulator skilled at delay tactics, spoke first. My client was accused while performing routine patrol duties and expressing legitimate concern for the safety of an elderly citizen. Any allegations of violent conduct are subjective misinterpretations lacking objective evidence. The room fell silent until the presiding officer's voice rang out. Captain Daniel Holloway, please present your case. This translation captures the climactic build-up, emotional stakes, and vivid narrative of the original, with clear, natural English suited for AI narration or English readers. Here's the translation into natural, clear English, structured for easy AI narration, preserving the dramatic tension, emotional depth, and vivid imagery of the original. Daniel stepped forward. He wore a simple suit, no rank, no insignia, just a son standing up for his mother and for the truth. He opened his laptop and connected it to the projector. The screen lit up. The park camera video began to play. Margaret Holloway walked slowly along the gravel path. Craig Dalton appeared, yanking her cane and tossing it to the ground. She collapsed. There was no concern, no potential threat, only raw brutality. The room stayed silent. When the video stopped, Daniel spoke. This isn't policing. This is deliberate humiliation of someone who couldn't defend herself. He placed it on the table. Tyler Rhodes' sworn statement. Clara Jenkins' testimony. Jaden's report. The patrol log confirms Dalton's presence. Dalton's lawyer, Vincent DeMarco, fired back. Footage can be misleading. Context matters. Could it be? Officer Dalton was reacting to something not shown in the clip. Daniel didn't need to respond. Mrs. Camilla Boyd, seated at the center of the panel, answered instead. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut sharper than any lawyer's. No professional response begins with snapping a blind woman's cane. And if there's context, it's the context of a system that's long believed people like Margaret don't deserve respect. For the first time since entering the room, Craig Dalton lowered his head. No more excuses, no more arrogance. No one was shielding him now. An hour later, the preliminary ruling came. Officer Craig Dalton is indefinitely suspended, pending a criminal investigation by the district prosecutor's office. His actions show signs of abuse of power, assault on a civilian, and severe ethical misconduct in the line of duty. As Daniel left the building, local reporters swarmed, but he didn't stop for cameras. He didn't speak. He didn't wave. He just made a call. Mom, I think we've taken the first step. But he knew this was only the first chapter. A criminal trial, pushback from colleagues, threats, all still loomed ahead. After the hearing, Ashton Creek seemed like it might settle, but instead, a new storm brewed. Craig Dalton was suspended, but he wasn't alone. Within the department, a group of loyal officers still believed punishing him over some blind old lady and a blurry video was unfair. The first sign came the next morning. Daniel arrived at the station to gather new case files. The desk clerk, a woman who'd worked there for 15 years, avoided his gaze. "Sorry, Captain. Your access, it's temporarily revoked." "Reason?" Daniel asked. His eyes locked on her. "I'm just following orders. They said internal security is under review." In the parking lot, a small knife was stabbed into the back seat of Daniel's car, wrapped with a handwritten note. "A traitor's worse than a criminal." In the next 48 hours, his reports on community complaints were returned for improper formatting. His department email account was locked 3 times without explanation. A meeting with the district prosecutor's office was cancelled with no reason given. That evening, Daniel sat in the dim kitchen, the clock ticking softly. Margaret Holloway, his mother, poured tea. "They've started, haven't they?" she asked without needing to see. "They have, Mom. But this time, they're not using canes or fists. They're using paperwork, internal networks, and the code of silence." But then, something Daniel didn't expect. A call from an unknown number. Holloway speaking. I'm Michael Herrick, former officer. I worked with Craig Dalton 5 years ago. There's something you need to know." "What is it?" Daniel asked, his eyes widening. "Dalton was investigated internally in Jacksonville for assaulting a prisoner, but the file, it was buried, erased." "Do you have proof?" Daniel asked. "I have a printed copy of the original internal report. I couldn't keep it forever. I stayed silent too long, but after seeing Mrs. Holloway on the news, I couldn't take it anymore." 2 days later, a package arrived at Daniel's house. Inside, a copy of the 2017 internal investigation report. Attached was a note from a superior at the time. Due to Dalton's father being a high-ranking former officer, the matter was handled internally. No disciplinary action was taken. A buried file, now resurfaced, could be the fatal blow. That evening, Daniel sat with his mother. She said little, just held the report, slowly turning each page. "Do you know what you're up against?" she asked. "I do. But I also know if I don't do this, he'll come back. Or worse, someone else like him will, thinking this town's still asleep." She gave a faint smile. "Then let me brew some tea. Looks like we've got plenty of sleepless nights ahead." Outside, rain poured, but in that small house, the fire of justice never dimmed. 3 days after receiving the old file from Michael Herrick, Captain Daniel Holloway walked into the Hallstone County Courthouse with a black briefcase. Inside were things no one expected to still exist. The 2017 internal report on Craig Dalton, a new witness statement, and a handwritten letter from Herrick, signed in ink. In the office of Prosecutor Quinn Maxwell, a man who'd initially hesitated to take Margaret Holloway's case, things had changed. Maxwell, bald with piercing eyes, held the new file, silent for 7 minutes. No one spoke. Finally, he sighed. If this is verified, this isn't just a single act of misconduct. It's a system that's been covering up and burying crimes in the dark." A formal criminal investigation was launched. But as soon as the file was submitted, things took a darker, more suspicious turn. Internal police department records were abruptly deleted from the system in the middle of the night. The backup server suffered a technical glitch. The IT staffer in charge, a man named Roland, suddenly took unannounced leave. Daniel immediately reported it to the Special Investigations Committee. He requested an independent backup from the federal government's records, since the park's camera was federally funded. 3 days later, they sent the backup. The video was still intact. "Good thing you planned ahead," Veronica said. "Otherwise, we'd be facing a technical error for real." Meanwhile, Craig Dalton was sinking. The press began digging into his past. 2 complaints quashed in 2018, a suspected altercation in a holding cell, a wrongful arrest that never made it to the records. He was no longer protected. The system wasn't backing him anymore. But the most damning piece came in a 37-second audio recording sent to Daniel's email from an anonymous source. The voice belonged to Charles Albright, the former police chief who retired last year. Dalton's the golden boy. No one touches him. His mum's the judge's niece, Headley. His dad's the mayor's hunting buddy, Carson. Whatever he does, we clean it up. But don't let the public know. If they find out, we're all done." A seismic blow. It wasn't just Dalton. The entire town's machinery was teetering. Tittle! That night, Daniel returned home. His mother sat on the wooden rocking chair, a new cane resting beside her. The house was peaceful, but neither of them could sleep. "They won't let this go, will they, son?" she asked, her eyes fixed ahead. "No, but this time, we're not fighting alone," Daniel replied. The next morning, Daniel held a brief press conference in Everhart Gardens Park. No theatrics, no accusations, just one simple statement. The truth doesn't die. It just waits for someone brave enough to name it. The prosecutor's office issued a formal announcement. Craig Dalton will face 3 charges: abuse of authority, aggravated assault, and destruction of evidence. Additionally, a broader investigation will examine the role of officials in covering up misconduct. For the first time in years, Ashton Creek felt something shift, not a storm, but justice is stirring back to life. Hey. Hallstone County Courthouse. Monday. A light rain fell. The air was heavy, carrying the weight of decades of burdens this town had borne. Today wasn't a hearing. No more hiding behind memos or internal reviews. Today was a public trial, where Craig Dalton faced the people, stripped of his badge to shield him. At 9 a.m., Judge Eleanor Ridgewell struck her gavel, opening the criminal trial for 3 charges: intentional assault on a disabled person, abuse of power in the line of duty, destruction and concealment of evidence. Craig Dalton sat in the defendant's chair, his face ashen, silent. Gone was the slick-talking lawyer DeMarco. Only the quiet of a man with no escape remained. The courtroom was packed. Townsfolk who'd once lived in fear, past victims who'd stayed silent, local and regional press, and in the front row, Margaret Holloway, holding her new cane, her head slightly bowed, but her eyes brighter than ever. The first witness is Jaden, the coffee vendor from the park. He spoke clearly, then presented the original video he'd recorded on his phone. The room held its breath as the sound echoed. Crack! The cane snapping. The sound of freedom trampled. The second witness, Clara Jenkins, the young mother. I couldn't hear everything, but I saw how he yanked the cane and how she fell. I picked up my daughter, wanting to run to her, but I was afraid. Today, I'm here, so my child doesn't grow up in a town where silence is the law. Finally, Daniel stepped to the witness stand. No uniform, no title of captain. Just Daniel Holloway, a son. I'm Margaret's son, and I stand here, not just to accuse one man, but to force us, all of us, the system, to look in the mirror. Someone like Craig Dalton couldn't thrive for 10 years without people knowing. We don't need an apology. We need a promise that this will never happen again. The prosecution presented the final evidence, the buried 2017 internal investigation file, the audio recording from former police chief Charles Albright, patrol logs, witness testimonies, and corroboration from the Federal Investigation Committee. After 6 hours, the jury retired to deliberate. The courtroom held its breath. Nearly 90 minutes later, they returned. The foreperson held a white sheet of paper, trembling slightly. A second of silence. On all 3 charges, we find the defendant, Craig Dalton, guilty. The courtroom erupted in a collective exhale. No clapping, no cheers. Just the release of a long-held weight. Craig Dalton slumped over the table, his hands clenched, knuckles white. The judge delivered the sentence. 10 years in prison without parole for intentional assault on a disabled person. 7 years for abuse of power. 3 years for destruction of evidence. Total sentence. 20 years in custody, effective immediately. Daniel turned to his mother. She gripped his hand tightly. Not a single tear fell. We didn't stay silent. That's what matters most, she whispered. Weeks later, a small bronze plaque was erected in Everhart Gardens Park, right by the bench under the oak tree where it all began. It read, "Dedicated to those who cannot see the light but still walk the right path. This is where a community learn to speak. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with sirens or a gavel's bang. Sometimes it starts with a trembling step on a familiar path, with a broken cane and wounded pride. But if you're determined enough, if you dare to speak when others stay silent, a single act can shake an entire town." Margaret Holloway didn't need eyes to see the truth. She only needed a son who would stand against the darkness, even when it wore a uniform. And because of that, justice finally walked forward, needing no one to guide its way.